Thank you to my patrons. Your generosity and commitment to my work is astonishing. I sincerely appreciate it.
So the allegation here is that the world is so used to having black women under its boot that that's the reason we were shocked when one of them was defended. No. No, 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 no! That's not what's happening here. The world isn't shocked because a black woman was defended. The world is shocked because Will Smith physically assaulted a comedian live on air while the world was watching. You are insane! This analysis is so divorced from reality that it's fairy tale.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank you.
Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and don't worry, the video is about to begin. I just wanted to make you aware of my Patreon. So guys, for as little as £3 per month or as much as £50 per month, you can support my mission here on my channel, The Magic Skeptic. And so if you want to gain access to all sorts of bonuses and extras, including things like downloadable episodes of my podcast that are ad-free and audio-only that you can listen to on the go, or perhaps you want to have a question answered in a monthly video, or, you know, better still, maybe you want to sit down and have an actual Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic. If all of that sounds good, well, it's all available in my Patreon. As I said, for as little as £3 per month or as much as 50, you can gain access to a plethora of bonuses and extras. And so if that sounds good, you can check out the link to my Patreon in the description below. I hope to see you there. Hey everybody, Magic Skeptic here, and you're all most welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. So guys, I'm going to start off today's episode by apologizing. If I sound a bit off, if I sound a bit chesty, perhaps it's because I have a chest infection. I'm actually a little bit under the weather at the time of this recording, but the show must go on. So, as I said, yeah, I'm going to sound a little bit off today. I might not have the same energy levels. I have a chest infection right now, and I'm filled with antibiotics as we speak. So if I'm a little bit odd, a little bit more sniffly, I hope you'll see fit to forgive me. I thought it was more important to put out an episode regardless. And what an interesting episode it's going to be. Guys, if you've been following my channel for any length of time, you know that I don't cover the news per se. I don't cover, certainly not celebrity gossip. I don't cover TMZ, who did this, who's breaking up with who's cheating on this other person, yada yada yada. I don't cover that kind of stuff. And I hope that the thumbnail for this episode hasn't led you to think that that's what this episode is going to be about. If you have been following my channel, you know that this channel is home to all things philosophy and skepticism. My raison d'etre, if you will, my goal on this channel is to promote skepticism and atheism and to encourage people to have good, solid epistemological foundations for the beliefs that they hold. And this topic might seem like it is unconnected, but hold tight, because the alarming absence of skeptical thought on this particular news topic is just obscene, and that's precisely why I wanted to discuss it. So, as you've seen in the thumbnail, I'm speaking, of course, about the slap that was heard around the world.
Jada, I love you. G.I. Jane 2, can't wait to see it. All right? That was a nice one. Okay. I'm out here. Richard. Oh, wow. Wow. Will Smith just smacked the shit out of me.
I know the last thing you probably want, dear listener, is another dissection of the Will Smith slapping Chris Rock in the face fiasco. So that's not what you're going to get here. I'm not going to discuss the morality of the slap. I think, just as a passing comment, I think it's blindingly obvious that what Will Smith did to Chris Rock was disgusting, immoral, and uncalled for. And yeah, I don't think there's anything else to say on that matter, really. And at the time of recording, I've just found out that Will Smith has received a 10-year ban from the Academy for having done so. And so I think that's a decent punishment. I think Chris Rock declined to press charges, and so that'll be the end of it. And look, fine. If Chris Rock had pressed charges, I would have supported him in doing that also. Whatever your thoughts are on that, that's kind of beside the point. What I wanted to discuss in today's episode is an article that I encountered on the Guardian website. I encountered this while scrolling the other day, and I could not believe what I saw. I'm referring to an article which is titled, "White Outrage About Will Smith's Slap is Rooted in Anti-Blackness. It's Inequality in Plain Sight." Just take a moment to absorb what I just read. Just take a moment to absorb it. And if you share a similar attitude to myself, take a deep breath and allow yourself to calm down. Because that's what I had to do when I read this. Guys, is racism a problem in society? Yes. Have we eliminated racism? No. Is there more work to be done? Of course there is, absolutely. But I'll tell you, every single time somebody identifies something as racism, when it clearly isn't, all these people do is hurt the anti-racist movement. You know, I mean, I've made a video on this in the past. I made a video, the thumbnail of which read, "How Not to Identify Racism." And in that video, I looked at a clip of Boris Johnson at a Conservative Party meeting where he was shaking the hands of random individuals in the crowd, and he happened to bypass 2 persons of colour. Of course, there were people on the left who jumped upon this and alleged that this was an explicit example of Boris Johnson's racism. And if you're interested in that video and how that isn't a good way to identify racism and how it is in fact just a failure in skepticism to suggest as much, if you're interested in that video, I'll include the link in the description below. But here we have another one. Another similar example where somebody is racializing an event that need not be racialized. And what I'm going to do over the episode here is break down this article. We're going to study it, we're going to look at it in depth, and I'm going to suggest that this racial interpretation of the event is absolutely ridiculous and a complete and utter failure in one's skepticism. And so if you're ready for that, guys, if you want to go on this journey with me and you're interested, well then buckle up and let's dive right in. So guys, the article is actually quite short, so I'm going to read a section, or I might even read all of it. We'll see how we go here. And I'm just going to break it down word for word and why I think this is absolutely asinine. So again, this writer, her name is, I apologize if I mispronounced this, by the way. Her name is Teo Burrow, or Barrow. Teo Barrow, I don't know, I'm not sure. You'll see it on screen anyway. I'm going to put it up on screen. So it comes with a subheading. This kind of performative pearl clutching is reserved for black men who mess up. It was a bad incident, but the Oscars have seen worse. Okay, let's proceed. We do not condone violence. Assault is never the answer. These words have echoed through all of my social media accounts since Will Smith slapped Chris Rock for making a poor taste joke about Smith's wife, Jada Pinkett Smith.
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!
The joke referenced Pinkett Smith's shaved head, a decision she made due to her struggles with the autoimmune disease, alopecia. Now, guys, this is going to be a central point in this conversation. Obviously, in the aftermath of the slap, it emerged that Jada Pinkett Smith actually suffers from alopecia. Now, I didn't know that. I don't imagine a lot of people knew that. Perhaps the TMZ celebrity culture people knew that because they would have been following Jada Pinkett Smith's life with a magnifying glass. You know, there are people who eat and breathe this stuff. I'm not one of them. I don't imagine Chris Rock is one of them either. I think Chris Rock has plenty to do with his time other than chasing up news stories about other celebrities, although I have heard that he perhaps is personally acquainted with Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith, and maybe he did know. I don't know. But I'm going to argue in this video that whether or not Chris Rock knew is actually immaterial. It's actually irrelevant. But I'll come back to that a little later on. Let's continue. Most people agree the slap shouldn't have happened. You bet your bottom dollar most people agree on that. But there's something that feels precious at best and downright racist at worst about white people's reaction to the now infamous smack. So right out of the gate, this author is alleging that people's reaction is rooted in racism. Now, in the article title, it says anti-blackness, but we all know that anti-blackness is just a euphemism for racism. But at least she owns it here. So the allegation is that my frustration, and I am a white privileged male at the end of the day, but my reaction apparently is rooted in anti-blackness or racism. Well, I respectfully disagree. Burrow or whatever the hell your name is. I respectfully disagree. But let's keep reading. Let's give her the benefit of the doubt. I mean, we have to steelman the proposition, and how better to steelman somebody's argument than to actually read it in full. So presumably she has some pretty solid evidence to substantiate this allegation of racism. Let's keep reading. The Hollywood director Judd Apatow declared in a deleted tweet that Smith could have killed Rock. Seriously? Calling it pure out-of-control rage and violence. Apatow later confirmed he wasn't even watching the show when he made the remarks. So I haven't looked into the Judd Apatow comment, and apparently he's now deleted that tweet. Fine. But is she, I mean, forgive me, but is she marshalling this as evidence of racism? So Judd Apatow, if he commented on it in such a hyperbolic manner and hadn't even seen it, is clearly a moron. Forgive me, Mr. Apatow, but it sounds like you put your foot in it here, my friend. But racism? Is this... Does she actually believe that this is evidence in favour of her case? I speak a lot about so-called candidate explanations. Is racism even a candidate explanation? How is one drawing a line between racism and Judd Apatow's actions here? Judd Apatow, again, I've already said it, but this is clearly a moronic thing to have done, but being a moron isn't synonymous with being a racist. Judd Apatow referred to it as pure out-of-control rage and violence. Yeah, I wouldn't agree with that characterization at all. I watched the clip. I wouldn't have called it that. I definitely think it was out of control. I wouldn't call it pure out-of-control rage and violence. That, for me, that phraseology seems to imply that he, beat Chris Rock within an inch of his life and kicked him almost to death on the floor or something. And so, no, I wouldn't agree with that characterization, but by Judd Apatow's own admission, he didn't even see it, and he deleted that tweet. So, I don't know, it seems like this author is alleging that this behaviour by Judd Apatow is best explained by racism. I'm at a loss for how she's connecting those dots, but then irrational positions usually are that way. One struggles to understand how they connected the dots, because the truth is, those dots cannot actually be meaningfully connected. But let's keep reading. The radio host Howard Stern compared Smith to Donald Trump, while white women on Twitter somehow decided that Smith's actions meant he must be beating his wife. Again, I'm not aware of the context in which Howard Stern referred to Will Smith, and I'm not aware of the sense in which he compared Donald Trump and Smith. I have no idea. But regardless of the context, I don't see the connective tissue here. I don't see a bright line between racism and what Howard Stern is saying here. Let's keep reading. The white women comment is particularly disconcerting. Let's read this again, right? So the author goes on to say, white women as a group, Christ above, white women on Twitter somehow decided that Smith's actions meant he must be beating his wife. Can you just reflect for a moment, dear listener, on the outrageous nature of that statement? So it groups all white women together. White women on Twitter decided that this might be evidence that Will Smith is a wife beater. Imagine I wrote that exact same statement, but I swapped out white women for black women or black men. If I had grouped black women or black men or another racial ethnic minority or what have you, another immutable characteristic, if I'd grouped them all together in a sweeping statement like this one, How do you think that would go down in today's society? If I wrote an article that said, black women decided on Twitter that X is true, or that black men on Twitter decided on Twitter that X is the case, you would instantly, and justifiably so, have questions and curiosities and suspicion about my racism, about my intent there, right? And those would be perfectly justifiable. But this person writes that white women suspect that Will Smith might be a wife beater, and that's somehow permissible. I think this is a disgusting statement, because first of all, you cannot possibly categorize in that way. Presumably, and I could take 20 seconds here and go and search the annals of Twitter, and I would find so-called white women on both sides of this issue. Because there are people, reprehensible though they are, who have defended Smith on this question. People who are white, not white, all differing races. This issue was more divisive than I ever thought it could possibly be. I thought this was an open and shut case. Will Smith assaulted Chris Rock in front of the world who was watching. Despicable action. Wrong. Should be punished. End of story. But there were people who defended Smith and said things like, oh, well, he was just defending his wife. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't defending his wife. What a ridiculous interpretation. If his wife was offended or upset by a comment, defending her doesn't include physically assaulting a comedian. Defending your wife, in my view, is something akin to, oh, somebody is trying to assault her, so I step in and I defend her, right? Or if you want to use the defense argument here, defending his wife might have been speaking to Chris Rock backstage and saying, hey, listen, Chris, that joke really offended and upset my wife. Could you just lay off in future? I'd appreciate if you didn't talk about it. Chris Rock is a decent, upstanding individual, and I imagine his response would have been, oh, fair enough. Look, I didn't realize. I perhaps didn't even know that she had alopecia, right? But again, we'll come back to that later on. I find this absolutely disgraceful that this author brackets all white women into a single category and alleges that they are all suggesting that Will Smith is now a wife beater. Albeit, I think actually theorizing about Will Smith's behavior here is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, given his behavior. If he was so emboldened as to slap, physically assault someone while the world's cameras were watching, if he was so emboldened that he was willing to do that while everybody was watching, there is a really good question to be asked about what he might be willing to do when nobody is watching. Because most people, I think it's a general truism to say, are on their best behavior when they're being observed. So, I think it's a perfectly reasonable suspicion to have about how Will Smith might behave behind closed doors, if this is how he was willing to behave when the world was watching. But yeah, this author decides to bracket off white women into a single homogenous category, which in my view, and I'm going to call it for what it is, I think that's racist. I think the author of this article is a racist. Yeah, I said it. Let's keep reading. It would seem that there's a layer of hyperviolence that's being projected onto Smith simply because he is a black man who is defending his black wife. Christ above. A layer of hyperviolence? There isn't a layer of hyperviolence here. Nobody needs to project a layer of hyperviolence. What Will Smith did was hyperviolent. Now, maybe you want to dispute the use of the word hyper. Fine. Okay, fine. Let's disabuse the story of the word hyper. Is what he did violent? Absolutely. It's textbook violence. And by the way, I wouldn't be so quick to dismiss the word hyper there. I mean, in front of the world, he got up and physically assaulted someone, and it didn't end there. When he went back to his seat, he was screaming at the top of his lungs, "Get my wife's name out of your mouth."
Keep my wife's name out your fucking mouth!
And his face, he had lost it. He was clearly unhinged. He was terrifying. I don't think hyperviolent is the least accurate thing to say. I don't think it's necessarily the most accurate thing to say, but I could certainly buy that someone had a genuine interpretation that included the description something like hyper-violent. But again, you see this ridiculous statement here that all he was doing was defending his wife. No, he wasn't. I won't reiterate that entire argument here. Defending someone doesn't include this kind of behaviour. That's not what defense is. Defense has a very specific meaning. You defend yourself if you're being attacked. And I'm sorry to those of you who might have bought the nonsense that this argument is, but no, words are not violence. Sorry. Comedians telling jokes on stage are not violence. They're not an attack. To say that he was defending his wife implies that she was being attacked. No, she wasn't. There was a joke that was made about her. That is not an attack. And if you're going to use the word attack there, you are just equivocating. You are equivocating. You are not using the word in a literal way. You're using it in a metaphorical way. What happened to Jada Pinkett Smith is that she was made feel uncomfortable because a joke was said about her. Just like Chris Rock joked about many other celebrities who were in the auditorium on the night. But apparently Jada Pinkett Smith needed to be defended. I think this is ridiculous. Let's keep going. While it's justifiable, important even, to interrogate his motives for delivering the slap, you bet your bottom dollar it is, was this really all about defending his wife or more about his own ego? I think a very good question. It's the first sensible question that this author has asked in this article. It's clear that the backlash against Smith is rooted in not just anti-blackness, but respectability politics as well. Now, maybe it's rooted in respectability politics. What he did was pretty damn disrespectful, fine. But the idea that this author just thinks it's a given that this is rooted in anti-blackness, despite having provided absolutely zero compelling evidence. There's been some loose references to Howard Stern and Judd Apatow, and I've analysed those, and I don't see the connective tissue. I don't see the line between racism and how people have reacted to Will Smith's slap. Is it not the most obvious interpretation of people's reaction that this was actually just quite a shocking thing to have happened? That what Will Smith did was obscene? Right? I mean, I watched it. I didn't watch the Oscars live because they're on so late in my time zone and I had work the next day, but I woke up the next day and my phone had lit up with a million notifications about the event. And when I watched it, I could not believe my eyes. I was shocked and appalled, as I'm sure the vast majority of people who saw it were as well. How has this anything to do with racism? How has this anything to do with race at all? The only people looking at this through the lens of race appear to be racists. This author is clearly a racist. You are the one who was racializing this event. No one was even thinking about this through the lens of race until you brought it up, you moron. Are you kidding me? And then you want to group all white women together into a single homogeneous category, painting them all with the one brush? How is that not the exact rhetoric of a racist? The irony here is beyond belief. Don't worry, guys, we're almost there with this article. You won't have to suffer too much longer, but let's keep going here. It's also not just about what Smith did, it's where he did it and who was watching. Anyone who has been following these shows can see that Smith is being held up to much stricter standards than white men who have behaved just as badly or even worse in those settings. In 1973, John Wayne had to be restrained by 6 security guards when he tried to rush the stage and attack the Native American actor and activist, Sacheen Littlefeather. Littlefeather was on stage to accept the Best Actor award on behalf of Marlon Brando, who was boycotting the awards in protest at Hollywood's depictions of Native Americans. So, this is a very serious incident as well. I don't deny that this is a very serious incident. It happened in 1973. And he was stopped. But this is utterly bizarre, right? So this author is marshalling this comparison as an example of where Will Smith has been treated more seriously and held to a higher standard, but she has included the refutation to her position in her very own words. Let me read it again in case you missed it. In 1973, John Wayne had to be restrained by no less than 6 security guards. So when John Wayne attempted to assault someone, a white man, he was restrained by 6 security guards. Where was Will Smith's restraining? Where were the security guards restraining Will Smith? And if you're not aware, dear listener, they asked Will Smith to leave. Because you could argue, oh, well, it didn't look like Will Smith was going to assault Chris Rock, and so they didn't send any security guards. Fair enough. And you know what? I agree with that. When Will Smith stood up and approached Chris Rock, even Chris Rock thought that Will Smith was about to just, take the piss. Oh, the Fresh Prince is going to have a little bit of a joke with me on stage. This is going to be great. Little bit of banter, little bit of heckling. Let's do it.
Uh-oh, Richard.
And then he fucking smacks him. I think Chris Rock was shocked by that. I was shocked by that. The security professionals in that auditorium were shocked by that. But did you know, dear listener, that after the smack, that Will Smith was asked to leave? And you know what he said? No. He said no. Did the security guards remove him? No, they didn't. And you want to marshal this example as evidence of Will Smith being treated more harshly? Are you kidding me? Is this author joking? Sometimes, I had to double check this article and make sure that it wasn't published on April 1st, because this reads like an Onion article. It reads like a piss take. It reads like an April Fool's joke. This is obscene. I'm going to use that word so many times in this episode, but I'm just shocked by the lack of intellectual rigor in the comparison. I mean, John Wayne physically restrained by 6 security guards. Will Smith smacks Chris Rock with impunity. Sits there for the rest of the night. Gets the Oscar. Goes up on stage and makes his best actor speech to rapturous standing ovations. And he does it all with impunity. And you want to say that he's being held to a higher standard. I'll tell you, he's being held to a different standard, all right. He's been allowed to carry out his assault with impunity, at least on the night. I'm happy to hear that since then the Academy has decided on a strict punishment and they've banned him for 10 years. But if you're going to suggest to me that this John Wayne comparison demonstrates your anti-blackness racist case, I'm afraid to say that you just are not paying attention. If anything, this demonstrates special treatment on behalf of Will Smith. Anyway, let's keep going. Wayne got to keep his awards after the incident, but pending a review, Smith could very well have his historic Best Actor win revoked. Now, admittedly, and just to steel man the position of the author here, this article was written before the Academy made its final decision about the punishment, and I'm happy to see, actually, that Smith hasn't lost his Academy Award. I don't think he should. The Academy doesn't give out awards for Best Actor on the basis of how nice you are off camera. They give out the Best Acting Awards on the basis of your performance. Will Smith could have smacked Chris Rock, kicked him in the head, and killed him on stage. I'm very happy he didn't do that. But if he did do that, it wouldn't detract from the fact that he was, in fact, the best actor by popular vote in the Academy. That wouldn't detract from the quality of his performance. So we cannot be rescinding awards on the basis of people's misbehavior. This is something that was so disgusting when Richard Dawkins, who has made some very controversial statements about the trans movement in recent years, his award, he was given the Humanist of the Year award, I believe. That reward was rescinded, which made no sense to me at all, because whatever Richard Dawkins is doing in the present, and whether or not you think he's misbehaving or making controversial statements or what have you, that doesn't detract from what he did for the humanist movement in the past. And so I always felt that the rescinding of that award was just kind of like a non sequitur. It's kind of just a pointless, silly thing to do. It doesn't make any sense. And so I'm happy that they didn't remove his award. And you know what? Had they removed his Academy Award, I would have agreed with this author that that was rather peculiar and suspicious. That would have been a form of negative special treatment. And then I would have been much more open to the case that Will Smith is being treated differently. And then maybe I would have been more willing to accept a racial interpretation of the event. But even then, it's not like it would be a slam dunk victory just because there was a disparity. Disparity doesn't necessarily equate with the discrimination. You'd still have to do some, proving there. You'd have to draw a line between your racial allegations and what actually happened. But look, that's beside the point, because they haven't removed his reward, and I'm actually quite thankful that they didn't, because it wouldn't make any sense at all. But let's keep going here. Mind you, this is the same academy that gave Roman Polanski an award in absentia after he pleaded guilty to a charge of unlawful sex with a minor and fled the country before he could be sentenced. The double standard is glaring. It would only be a double standard if Will Smith had had his reward removed, and that's not happening, right? That's not happening at all. And no, there is no double standard here, because they gave Roman Polanski a person, I'm not going to use the word beginning with P because it's going to get this video demonetized, but Roman Polanski, as it says here, had unlawful sex with a person who was very, very young. And so we all know what that makes Roman Polanski a disgusting scumbag, for lack of a better description. But yeah, they give him a standing ovation and they give him his award, but that isn't a discontinuity with the Will Smith situation. While Will Smith's crime here isn't near as serious, it demonstrates a continuity in Hollywood behaviour. Will Smith received a standing ovation despite his behaviour, and so did Roman Polanski. They both were commended with impunity, really, despite the fact that they both did terrible things, albeit they did terrible things that are different gradations on that line that is terrible. Roman Polanski's crime obviously being much, much more serious. But again, there is no double standard here. So admittedly, again, the author here is held back by the moment in time in which this article was written. This was before the punishment of the Academy had been confirmed, so perhaps the author will have changed her mind on some of this stuff. But as we keep reading, it'll become clear that this author is absolutely copper fastened to the idea that Will Smith's treatment is rooted in racism. If that wasn't clear already, it becomes even glaringly more obvious as the article continues, regardless of how the Academy was going to punish him. So let's keep going. I also find it hard to believe that the same white audiences who consume violence against black people on screen to an almost fetishistic degree and are quite happy to have the Academy reward these gratuitously violent projects year after year are so distraught about an open palm slap. Again, this kind of performative pearl clutching is only ever reserved for black men who mess up. This, dear listener, is probably the most disgusting section in the entire article. This is where the ridiculousness reaches fever pitch. So now we're being castigated for enjoying films in which black people have violence committed against them on screen. I don't even know how to respond to this. Violence in movies is so incredibly common. It's so incredibly common because movies are about escapism. Some of my favorite films of all time are the most violent films of all time. I'm thinking of films like The Raid. I'm thinking of films like, Terminator. And, like some of my favorite films of all time are ultra super violent films. And they're fantastic. And my enjoyment of them is not rooted at all in which race is having violence committed against them. This is just a big fat assertion. I mean, where is the evidence for this claim? So this author is claiming that white audiences consume violent films, specifically films that depict violence against black people, at a near fetishistic degree or a fetishistic level. Evidence? Do you want to supply evidence for these claims? Or are you just going to make one assertion after another? I think this is a despicable claim because it is an allegation that the majority of people in the white community are, to one extent or another, unconsciously or not, racist. And I just think this is ridiculous. Again, if you're going to make this claim, you better bring some evidence, because as Christopher Hitchens once put it, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed as such. And I'm going to dismiss this claim because it is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the other thing that makes this awful is that in this little subsection of the article, the author actually minimizes and attempts to shrug off the physical assault that Will Smith engaged in. In case you missed it, let me read that again. So, white people love violence against black people in films, apparently, and those same white people are distraught about an open palm slap. Now, what does that mean? What she means there, I think it's blindingly obvious. What she means is that an open palm slap is not a big deal. Get over it. You white people out there who love violence against black people in movies, you shouldn't be so distraught about an open palm slap. This is just unbelievable. First of all, let's steel man it. Let's imagine she's right. Let's just assume for the sake of discussion that she's correct. That white audiences love nothing more than the depiction of violence against black people in cinema. Please notice that the operative word in that entire statement is depiction. Violence in movies isn't real. So even if it were true that white audiences had a fetishistic craving for violence against black people in cinema, wouldn't it still make sense to be shocked by real-world violence when Will Smith smacked Chris Rock because that is real? Can't one have a fetishistic appetite for violence in cinema and still be blindsided, shocked and appalled by an example of real-world violence? Because I'll tell you right now, that fits my character description perfectly. I absolutely adore violence in cinema. I love it. I love films like Kill Bill by Quentin Tarantino. I love, as I said, films like The Raid, where the violence is at fever pitch. It's at level 11. Blood spatter, limbs being removed, people being beheaded, violence, violence, violence. It's amazing. I love it in cinema. It's escapism. It's amazing. The choreography, the cinematography, it's just glorious to behold. And yet I was shocked by the slap. Is my reaction, is my shock rooted in anti-blackness? Is my shock and, feeling that what I witnessed was obscene, is it rooted in some kind of fetishistic desire for violence against black people in cinema or something? Again, guys, these statements really do beg our belief. These statements are a complete and utter failure in skepticism. This author is just making one assertion after another, backed up by zero evidence. And when she does attempt to supply evidence in the form of comparisons, the comparisons actually make the opposite case. They invalidate her interpretation. And then she tries to minimize the slap and tries to shrug it off as though it's not a big deal. I think that, to be honest, is the most egregious thing that she says in this article. I think that's disgusting. To minimize physical violence and to suggest that it's no big deal and that, he's defending his wife, it's only a slap. We love gratuitous violence in cinema, so it's no big deal. Yeah, gratuitous violence in cinema is fake. A slap, a physical assault in the real world is real. And for you to minimize it is despicable. And you should be ashamed of yourself. And more so, The Guardian, you should be ashamed for publishing this piece. It says a lot about your editorial intentions. It says a lot about your credibility. It says a lot about your moral compass or lack thereof. But let's continue. But white outrage isn't the only problem. For black people who have been conditioned to constantly perform the most non-threatening version of themselves in order to retain white approval, the image of a black man being violent in a space notorious for its overwhelming whiteness must have felt like an abomination. The ESPN commentator Stephen A. Smith lambasted the actor on Twitter for staining the greatest moment of his career before taking to a video to express his disappointment. Again, guys, the ridiculousness just keeps getting stacked one layer on top of another. So white outrage isn't the only problem, albeit she hasn't substantiated the case for white outrage. Just remember that. For black people who have been conditioned to constantly perform the most non-threatening version of themselves in order to retain white approval. Do you have any evidence for this claim? So the claim is that black people feel a kind of a compulsion or a sense of pressure in order to behave a certain way around white people. Are you kidding me? Are you actually kidding me? Will Smith gets up in front of the world and slaps Chris Rock, another black man, in the face for everyone to see, and you want to allege that there's some kind of overbearing white pressure to behave oneself vis-a-vis the black community? Is that your claim? Is that really what you want to suggest here? Because as far as I can tell, Will Smith had absolutely zero inhibitions in this situation. He behaved exactly how he wanted to behave. Now, maybe if there is an argument to be made about pressure, I've seen people theorizing about a glance and a glare that Jada Pinkett Smith gave him. Maybe he felt compelled to act in a certain way because of her, but that wouldn't be anything to do with white pressure, would it? Of course not. But no matter what way you cut this, trying to suggest that white pressure is playing a role in this scenario is just absolutely ridiculous. Will Smith behaved exactly how he or Jada wanted him to behave. But apparently there's this overbearing pressure where black people, according to this author, have been conditioned to constantly perform the most non-threatening version of themselves. If what you're saying there is that people, white or otherwise, expect people not to slap other people in the face, then yes, that is an expectation. But I wouldn't call that a white expectation. And if that's what you're suggesting, is that not another blatant example of this author's racism? That it's a white expectation that we don't slap each other. I don't consider that a white expectation. I consider that a humanitarian expectation. An expectation, by the way, that's shared by most cultures, most times, right? Even throughout history, right? People just have followed certain golden rules. There are some exceptions, of course, but for the most part, the human species wouldn't have gotten this far if blatant assault and murder and things like that were just considered acceptable. They're not considered acceptable by most societies at most points in history, certainly not in 2022. But this has nothing to do with white pressure. I mean, again, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed as such. And this ESPN commentator, Stephen A. Smith, I don't know who he is, but the fact that he went on to express his disappointment and him pointing out that this has stained the greatest moment of his career, isn't that obvious? This should have been the most important moment in Will Smith's career. And instead of it being remembered for his achievement in acting, it's going to be remembered instead for him smacking Chris Rock in the face in a disgusting display of physical assault and being out of control and violent. I agree with this ESPN commentator. Now, maybe in half his moods, this ESPN commentator has said racist statements in the past. Maybe this author has cherry-picked this speaker for that reason. I don't know. So I'm just making that clear because I don't want somebody to jump into the comments below and say, oh, see, he is a racist. Maybe he is. All I'm saying is that these comments aren't indicative of anything racist because I agree with them. This did stay in the greatest moment in his career. His actions are going to be remembered rather than his win. Isn't that a shame? I don't know what else to say. Moving on. It's the Black Hollywood equivalent of being dragged to a corner and told off by your parents for cutting up in public and embarrassing your family. Except Smith isn't a child and the stakes here are much higher. Either way, it's clear that many people, even those in the community who mean well, only find the incident so objectionable because they hope Smith would perform propriety for white people in that space. This is just, guys, I'm running out of nouns and adjectives here, but I'm honestly in a state of disbelief. Yes, people in that auditorium expected Will Smith not to assault anybody, but this author speaks about that as he was expected to perform propriety for white people. Yeah, the white people in that room expected him not to physically assault anybody. I'm sure the black people in that room felt the same. I'm sure people of every ethnicity in that room felt the same, that he probably shouldn't assault anyone. But you're calling this expectation a white expectation. Words fail me, guys. Words fail me. Calling this the equivalent of being dragged to the corner and told off by your parents is ridiculous. This isn't being dragged to the corner and being told off by your parents. More or less the entire planet is in unanimous agreement that Will Smith's behaviour was despicable and wrong. And that judgment does not require a discussion about race. The author of this piece is the one who's racializing the event. My expectation that Will Smith conform to certain basic humanitarian standards and avoid hitting people has nothing to do with my whiteness. It has nothing to do with race at all. It has everything to do with my humanism and my expectation that your freedom to swing your hand ends at my face. And to view this through any other lens is sophistry. Now, maybe this author really believes what she's saying, but if she does, I'm just blown away by that. Because her really believing these things, in my mind, is akin to believing that 2 + 2 is equal to 74. I mean, that's the level of error here in this article. But we're not done yet. But let's not forget why all this started in the first place. In case there was any confusion, alopecia is absolutely a disability, and one that black women are more prone to. And, you know, at multiple points in this article, as I said, this might be the worst thing, but I'm going to have to say it again. This might actually be the worst thing. To call alopecia a disability, in my view, is sickening. To all of my listeners out there, some of whom may very well be disabled, I apologize that you had to hear that. Anybody out there who's in a wheelchair, for example, anybody out there who's blind or partially blind or profoundly deaf or what have you, you name a disability here. To lump in alopecia and call it a disability is just so unbelievably disrespectful to anybody who suffers from an actual disability. I saw Ricky Gervais make a funny comment on this where he said, oh, well, he's fat and going bald, so, you know, I want disability payments now.
Someone said it was joking about her disability. Well, I'm going a bit thin, so I'm disabled. That means I can park right up next to Tesco's now. And I'm fat. That's a disease, isn't it? I'm fat and balding. I am... I should get fucking benefit.
And you know what? I know Ricky Gervais is joking when he says that, but I agree with him. I think this is a ridiculous claim. You see this victimhood mentality? Now, Jada Pinkett Smith didn't do anything wrong in the night. Now, there's questions about whether or not she laughed at it. There's questions about whether or not she wanted Will to do it. Maybe she did, maybe she didn't. But even if she did want that, Will Smith has to own his own behaviour. He's the one who got up and physically assaulted Chris Rock. But as you can see throughout the entirety of this article, there's an attempt to victimize Will Smith, despite the fact that he is the victimizer, despite the fact that he is actually the scumbag who did what he did. I mean, this is disgraceful. Trying to create sympathy by calling alopecia a disability. I'm not minimizing alopecia, by the way. If anybody out there suffers from alopecia, I'm aware that that's a terrible thing. I'm aware that that sucks. I'm aware that that causes immense sadness and insecurity and pain. I understand. I'm not suggesting that your alopecia doesn't matter. I'm just not willing to call it a disability. I have male friends who suffer from male pattern baldness, some of whom started going bald at a very early age, and they are crippled with insecurity about it. It's an affliction that affects young men more so than any other group. And so, yeah, that can be debilitating, but it's not a disability. I'm sorry. And so I'm not diminishing the pain of those who suffer from alopecia or male pattern baldness or anything of that nature. I'm not diminishing that at all. I'm just not elevating it to the position of disability. And certainly I'm not going to accept it being elevated to such a cadence point in the name of a shoddy, wretched defense from a person who clearly wants to racialize an event that has absolutely nothing to do with race, from an author who's trying to victimize the victimizer, that is Will Smith. Even if it was a disability, let's steelman the proposition. Let's imagine Jada Pinkett Smith was actually disabled. Let's imagine she was in a wheelchair and Chris Rock got up and made a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith being in a wheelchair. Now, I would be the first to admit that such a joke would be in poor taste, but even then, I wouldn't agree with Will Smith getting up and physically assaulting Chris Rock. You cannot respond to words with violence. That is not acceptable. But let's continue here. Whether or not Rock knew about Pinkett Smith's condition, the politics of black women's hair is well known to be a historically fraught and often traumatizing topic. He should know. He made a documentary about it in 2009. And you know what? Yeah, look, I understand that. I agree that people can be insensitive and tribalistic. And, you know, there's a similar conversation that happens here in the UK about the burqa, which is an Islamic style of dress that women wear. And people can be quite, you know, tribalistic, and they can be bigoted and discriminatory in reaction to the burqa. And I think that those people who react that way are despicable. And so anybody who would want to mistreat a person of color for their hairstyle, I think is awful, right? But please notice the equivocation here. Yes, there are people, there are real racists in the world, and there are awful bullies in the world who will attempt to discriminate against somebody on the basis of some condition that they have, or the color of their skin, or a disability, or what have you. But that is quite distinct from a comedian on stage. A comedian on stage isn't actually telling you their opinion. Their number one job is to make you laugh. And to make us laugh, they poke fun at the things that are very often the most sensitive. Comedians make jokes about all sorts of risque topics. I'm sure Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith laughed at every other joke at the expense of other celebrities throughout the night, and there were many. But as soon as it came to them and them being made fun of, suddenly it requires a physical assault. You see, Ricky Gervais made this point as well, and this is the second time I'm referring to Gervais here, but I just think he's got the right answer here. Everybody has their thing that they're sensitive about. So you go to see a comedian's show, they make fun of disabled people, they make fun of murder, they make fun of all sorts of serious topics throughout the entire night. But then you come to maybe the vegan or the vegetarian, and the comedian makes a joke about them, and then the vegan or vegetarian starts heckling and storms out and writes a terrible review. Oh, it was terrible, the things they said about vegans and blah, 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 blah. Everybody's got the thing that they're sensitive about. Everybody's willing to laugh at everybody else's misfortune when the comedian shines their gaze upon them. But when it comes to their thing that they're sensitive about, they want to turn it into a big deal. And that's exactly what happened here. Many other celebrities were grilled and roasted by Chris Rock. This happens year in and year out at the Oscars, the Golden Globes, and many other awards shows. That's what comedians do. They roast celebrities. That's one of the things they do, at least. It's part and parcel. It's just, that is what you expect when you go to one of these awards shows. People have come to accept it. They've grown to expect this, right? But of course, Jada Pinkett Smith and Will Smith, they'll laugh at everything else, but not the thing that they're sensitive about. And that is unacceptable to me. Still, this kind of punching down on black women remains typical of many black male comedians who, like the rest of the world, don't see black women's struggles and experience as real or legitimate. This is so ironic. So she calls Chris Rock's joke an example of punching down. Clearly she's using the phrase punching down metaphorically, but there was a very real, literal punch or slap directed at Chris Rock's face by Will Smith. But she wants to call the joke an example of punching down. The irony here is laughable. And by the way, this is just another assertion. I see no evidence in this joke that Chris Rock is not sensitive to the struggles of black women. I see no evidence here that Chris Rock is in any way at all kind of lacking in sympathy towards any black movement. I don't think the joke shines any light on Chris Rock's attitudes towards race at all. I don't think the joke provides any insight into Chris Rock's thoughts on anything other than he thought that this was a good joke. That's it. But leave it to a moron like the person writing this article to suggest that this gives us a deep and depraved insight into Chris Rock's lack of sympathy. But there you go. And this lack of care for black women also partly explains why people were so taken aback by the image of Smith standing up for his wife in that way. No, he wasn't standing up for her. He was physically assaulting another person. Sorry, I've already dealt with that. I'm not going to rehash it here. But that is a disgraceful statement. It just doesn't work. Sorry. Let's keep going here. The world is so used to seeing black women as unworthy of being protected and fought for that it can't see any merit to Smith's actions or the emotions that spurred them. Again, guys, this is shocking. This is absolutely shocking. So the allegation here is that the world is so used to having black women under its boot that that's the reason we were shocked when one of them was defended. No. No, 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 no! That's not what's happening here. The world isn't shocked because a black woman was defended. The world is shocked because Will Smith physically assaulted a comedian live on air while the world was watching. You are insane. This analysis is so divorced from reality that it's fairy tale. No one in their right mind could possibly construe this event in this way. I was shocked because Will Smith, a person whose entire history demonstrated to me that he was a nice, stand-up, respectable, loving person, instead, he gets up on stage and physically assaults a comedian. That is why I was shocked. I was shocked because Will Smith's character, in my entire history of watching him and seeing interviews with him, I thought that this would be impossible for him to do. I didn't think in a million years that this kind of behaviour was becoming of Will Smith. I didn't think, if somebody was to ask me what are the celebrities in that room who are most likely to physically assault someone, I would have put Will Smith at the bottom of the list. His entire history demonstrates that this is unbecoming of him, and yet he did it anyway. That's why people were shocked. Even if this action had been committed by somebody with a history of assault, even then people would have been shocked because of how bold it was. People don't normally choose to physically assault people in front of the world. They normally don't choose to behave in such a despicable way when cameras are watching. They'll do things like that behind closed doors where they can get away with it. People were shocked because Will Smith has a reputation for being a nice guy. And people were shocked because Will Smith, despite this reputation, smacked Chris Rock in the face while the world was watching. This has nothing to do with race. Nothing. This has nothing to do with people being shocked that a black woman was defended. Don't make me sick. This isn't even an example of a black woman being defended. This is an example of a black man being attacked. But slap isn't a big deal according to you. Guys. Oh, I need to calm down. This is unbelievable. This is just unbelievable. But look, we're just at the end. Let me read the final section here. Smith has since apologized to Rock and the Academy, and this event will soon become just another wild story in our pop culture memory. But as we await the results of the Academy's investigation, what I hope will remain is the opportunity to truly question how society views black men, what we see as disability, and who we see as worthy of protecting. I'll tell you my answer to those three questions. What I hope will remain is the opportunity to truly question how society views black men. I'll tell you how society views black men, and that is abundantly obvious from this fiasco. Society expects that black men, white men, Asian men, whatever ethnicity, minority, race you want to mention here, society expects that those men not smack other men. That's the answer to the first question. Second question, what we see as a disability. Yeah, alopecia is not going to be viewed as a disability. That's the answer to that one. And for you to suggest that it should be, I think is a disservice to people who have real disabilities. Get over yourself. And lastly, and who we see as worthy of protecting. I'll tell you who I see as worthy of protecting. Comedians. Comedians who have committed no crime, and comedians who've done nothing other than to tell some jokes on stage. That's who I see as worthy of protecting. Right? That's simple. That's the article, guys. I know that article is painful. I know it's difficult to go through. I know it's maddening, or at least if you share my feelings, you will be frustrated by it. But I felt it was necessary to read it, because to view this scenario through the lens of race and to racialize it in the way that this author has done, I won't recapitulate the entire argument here, but again, it's a complete failure of skepticism. To suggest that this is explained and that people's reaction and that people's upset about this scenario is explained by racism, in my view, again, it's just a complete failure of skepticism. There are many candidate explanations. Now, let's again steelman the proposition. Are there going to be racists in the world who use and abuse this event for their purposes? You bet your bottom dollar. Of course there will be. There will be racists who say, see, look at those persons of colour. They just can't control themselves. They're just terrible, violent, primitive creatures, right? That's the kind of rhetoric that you'll get coming out of certain cohorts of humanity. Thankfully, or at least given my knowledge, the people who have viewed this that way are small in number. But that nuance is missing in this article that I just read. The Guardian and this author seem to be suggesting that the overarching reaction, the general response, was rooted in anti-blackness. Did you hear any differentiation in the article I just read? Did you hear any attempt to delineate between actual racists who are viewing this through the lens of race and suggesting that this is evidence of persons of colour being inferior or what have you? No, there was no such delineation. The allegation in this article is that if you're white and you were shocked and appalled by Will Smith's behaviour, that your reaction was rooted, to one extent or another, conscious or unconscious, your reaction was rooted in anti-blackness and racism. I think that's a despicable claim. I think it's an assertion that requires an immense amount of evidence, and I don't think we got any evidence in this article. What we got is sophistry. What we got was assertions. What we got were comparisons that made the opposite point. And what we got was appeals to emotionality. This is a despicable article, and anybody who finds it persuasive, in my view, needs to have their head examined. And I'm just hoping, dear listener, that my exploration of this article has, if indeed you were persuaded by it, or even if you were agnostic on the proposition, I'm hoping that my thoughts on this article have shifted your intuitions in what I believe to be the right direction. And if you already agreed with me, I hope that my analysis and breakdown of this article has just helped you to buttress and strengthen your own argument should you encounter anybody who wants to peddle such hogwash. So with all that said, guys, I want to thank you for watching this video, and I want to extend an extra special thank you to my patrons. If you aren't aware, my Patreon has launched. There are all sorts of bonuses and extras, like accreditation, which you'll have seen at the opening of this video, and you can have monthly questions answered, or you could even perhaps sit down and have a Skype call with yours truly, Magic Skeptic, depending on which tier you choose to sign up for. So if you are interested in supporting my channel at a deeper level, and you believe in my mission here, please do jump into the description below and you'll find the link to my Patreon. I'd love to have you. Other than that, guys, if you liked the video, make sure you drop a like. And if it's your first time visiting the channel, hit that subscribe button. And while you're at it, don't forget to check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. So guys, thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.